Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on handling investigation under GST, a practical insight. I'm joined by my colleague, Sourabh. Together, we'll be taking up this topic. And in this topic, we are not going to deal with the constitutional aspects or the legal aspects so much. Rather, our focus is more on the practical insight as to when you as a taxpayer, a business or an industry is faced with a GST investigation, then how you should practically handle it. What should be the preparedness? What should you do during investigation process? What you should be doing during if the actual search, etc. is complete, what you should be doing. So we'll take up this topic, and towards the end of the topic, we will also open a house for question answer round, in which you can either post your questions on the chat box, or alternatively, you could raise your hand. We can unmute you, and then you can directly raise your question. In today's topic, why this assumes importance, I'll just tell you that there is a news. It is from a RTI reply that Director General of GST Intelligence has booked cases worth 93,000 crore in the past 1 year. This news article came in Times of India on 25th January, and it was pursuant to a RTI reply by DGGI. So 93,000 crore worth of evasion, tax evasion. So that is very alarming. Now, all these things, they issued notices, about 7,000 odd notices. If we compare it to the total number of registered taxpayers, which is close to 1.24 crore, maybe 6 people out of every 10,000 registered taxpayers have been issued notices. That may not sound alarming, but the figure of 93,000 crore is quite alarming. And this is where CBIC was forced to issue instructions also, because the timelines for whether any investigation or any audit or any issuance of show cause notice in the GST law is still there. Yet CBIC issued instructions back in November 2021 to the field formations to issue show cause notices on priority within within the time frame prescribed under the law, and not to wait till the last moment, and also to adjudicate the cases promptly, so that revenue collection is there and the evasion cases can be brought to the notice. So with this, I've set up the background, and I'll ask my colleague Sourabh to take forward and discuss the initial topics as to the preparedness, etc. And then I will take over, and the remaining topics I will discuss. Over to you, Sourabh.
Thanks, DK, for setting the context right. Good afternoon, one and all. Before we move forward, these are the topics or the table of contents that we'll be covering in today's session, and this will be more from the practical standpoint that DK just pointed out. So initial topic would cover what are the pre-investigation preparations that we require to do, what happens when there is an inspection, search and seizure, what are the powers, who can come for an inspection, search and seizure, and then after investigation there are summons, during investigation there can be arrests, and we'll also guide you as to what will be the way forward in the entire scenario as to how do you conduct investigation, how do you handle investigations when there is one in your company or in your office. So we just had a poll question. We had put it on social media. The question that was put forth was, are you prepared for a GST investigation at this stage? So the answer that we got is very interesting, which says that 52% of the people or the taxpayers are actually prepared for an investigation at their office or at their premises. 42% say no, they are not prepared, and 6% are not sure. So the data depicts a lot of things. One is that only 50% of the entire field formations, or in fact the stakeholders, are actually prepared for a GST investigation. And secondly, the one of the major chunk, that is 42%, are actually not prepared. So one of the questions that pops up in our mind as to what are the preparations that are actually required when you face a GST investigation at this stage. So the next section that I'll be covering will essentially deal with the pre-investigation preparations. What kind of powers do the officers or do the GST authorities have when they come to your premises for an investigation? who are the proper officers, etc. And then we'll move on with other topics as well. So starting with the first topic, that is pre-investigation preparations. The first topic is who can investigate. Before that, what are the powers that one officer has while conducting an investigation at any premises? These are the powers: to inspect, search and seize, to access business premises, to inspect goods in movement, to summon, to arrest. So these are the broadly the powers that one officer has when he enters into your premises or an investigation or an inquiry is conducted. And who can conduct this then? So the person who can conduct these investigations are proper officers who are assigned such functions. There are other officers like joint commissioner, etc., who have already been assigned these functions directly in the act or through provisions. Secondly, there are external agencies like DRI, DGGI, anti-evasions, etc., which can also who also happen to be the proper officers in this in to investigate your cases or investigate your premises or your books of accounts. Thirdly, that a concurrent jurisdiction has been conferred only when there is no, the subject matter is not similar. The center and state can simultaneously conduct an investigation at your premises. So this is one provision that which is really dangerous as far as the investigations are concerned. At a given time, you can face multiple agencies who can investigate your premises. So with this, we move on to what actually needs to be prepared. So these are the records that need to be maintained by a taxpayer in regular course of business, which will essentially be investigated or looked towards during the course of any investigation. The first would be manufacturing records like stock records, goods received, supplied, balance of stock, raw materials, for finished goods, scraps, etc. So these are records relating to any manufacturing activity. These have to be maintained mandatorily in the business. Second is the records of inward and outward supply and details of suppliers and recipients. So the details of suppliers and recipients have to be maintained mandatorily. Then what are the kind of taxes that you are paying on regular basis on imports and also in reverse charge basis. Then the ITC that has been availed, utilized and reversed in the entire business or in a particular tax period, which they are actually investigating. Then there are agents which have to be or who have to be maintaining separate kinds of records, like the authorization of an agent, say an agreement between the principal and the agent, the goods that the agent is receiving on behalf of the principals, etc. So this is one record that has been specifically provided under the law. Then records relating to works contract supplied. So what kind of procurements are being done when you are executing any works contract. So these kinds of records are required to be maintained separately in the books. And then all supporting documents prescribed under law, which means that you have to maintain tax invoices, credit notes, receipt vouchers, records relating to advances, etc. So all those documents that you raise in a regular course of business to undertake a particular transaction, they have to be maintained on a regular basis. These records can be electronically be maintained as well. When you are maintaining an electronic record, it must have a backup as well. These records should be available at all places of business. So one thing is for sure, that it is not mandatory to maintain an electronic record. You can always maintain it at your own will or volitions. Then if any entry is getting erased in your books of accounts or effaced or overwritten, then you need to attest that entry, that whichever has been overwritten or effaced. And then when you are maintaining an electronic record, you have to if you are removing any entries, then you have to maintain a separate record of all those entries as well which have been removed, and the reasons for all those removal of entries. Third is that this record should be serially numbered, and then it has to be produced on demand. In addition to this, there are certain other documents which can be sought from the taxpayers on requirement basis, and only if they are required to maintain under various other laws as well. Before that, these records have a time limit to be maintained. This has to be maintained for 72 months from due date of annual return, or till 1 year after conclusion of litigation or investigation. So whichever is later. So this is the time period till which you need to mandatorily maintain any records in your business, and this is mandatory as per law. So these are the records that you require that may be sought from you: trial balance or equivalent, statement of annual financial accounts duly audited wherever required. So if any law prescribes or any other law prescribes for maintaining any financial accounts which are duly audited, then you have to maintain that, and the department can always, or GST authorities can always seek those informations as well. Similarly, is the cost audit report, income tax audit report, and any other relevant record which the government may prescribe in this regard. In addition to all these records that you generally require to maintain as per law, these are the records that are normally practically sought by the officers. So you need to be prepared well in advance for all these things. These are reconciliations relating to GSTR 1 and 3B, 3B and 2A, 2B, 9, 9C, GSTR 3B as such. What are the backings? What all transactions have gone into GSTR 3B of that particular tax period? Then the data of import, while the IceGate is now connected to the GST portal as well, but still you have to maintain those data of imports and reconciliations thereof. There are various occasions that we are witnessing these days that the department is seeking a reconciliation between e-way bill and GSTR 3B, which ideally cannot be reconciled, but yes, to avoid any dispute or any problems as such during investigation, we should be actually prepared for all these data as well. And yes, so this is to avoid any delay, unwarranted notices. You need to maintain all these data well beforehand, because this is naturally being sought in all kind of standard investigations these days. So we had another poll. The poll question was, are you aware of your rights and obligations in a GST investigation? So this is the result. So 38% of people say that yes, they're aware of their rights and obligations in a GST investigation. Similarly, 38% say no, that they are not aware of it, and 24% are not sure as to what are their rights and obligations at all. This gives you a clear picture as to the first question of the poll that we had put today. Said that, are you ready for an investigation? The people, the poll, the taxpayers or the attendees have answered that 52% of them are ready. However, in this poll question, if you see, they are not aware of their rights and obligations. So essentially, this is the irony that has happened here, that when you don't know the rights and obligations, then you are actually not prepared for an investigation as such. So this is one interesting picture that has come up to us as well. So with this background, we move on to what an inspection, search and seizure will entail or will hold for you under GST law. So when an investigation or inspection, search and seizure is conducted at your premises, there can be two provisions which can be invoked in the entire scenario. First is that the proper officer has power to access your business premises. This is provided under section 71. The proper officer can access the premises. The proper officer should not be below the rank of joint commissioner. What can he access the premises for? He can inspect the books of accounts, documents, computers, computer programs, computer softwares, etc. This access to business premises is ideally conducted to carry out any audit, scrutiny, verifications, and checks. And you have to submit all those documents that the proper officer may require. This can be submitted within the stipulated time period under section 71. But ideally, it is advisable to submit right at the front and be prepared for all those investigations right at the beginning itself. Then we move on to the most important highlight of this entire webinar, that is section 67, where the inspection, search and seizure essentially starts. So how is the provision worded? The provision is worded in such a way that the authorization has to be done by a joint commissioner, a person who is not below the rank of a joint commissioner. He can authorize a proper officer to go and inspect, search and seize. He must have a reason to believe before he authorizes the other person or other officer to actually to go and inspect or search and seize any particular premises. This can be invoked in cases where there has been reason to believe that suppression of transaction or stock of goods has happened, excess ITC or refund has been claimed, ITC basis bogus invoices have been claimed, maintained accounts in manner likely to cause evasion, which is a very broad and very subjective parameter. Then there has been escaping payment of taxes, transactions are not supported by e-way bill. So if these conditions actually get satisfied, then section 67 gets invoked, and the authorization will contain, or basically the proper officer not below rank of joint commissioner can order for inspection of a place of business. And then other reasons to believe that goods, documents, things useful in proceedings are secreted at some place. So in that scenario, there can be search and seizure as well. So this broadly comprises of section 67. This is how and when any inspection, search and seizure can be conducted at your premises. And what does place of business mean essentially? So it is defined under the GST law to say that from where the business is ordinarily carried on, from where the taxpayer maintains books of accounts, place where taxable person is engaged through an agent. These are all comprising of a place of business in the definition of the place of business in section 2 clause 85. So we move on. What must happen during an investigation and what must a taxpayer must ensure? He must identify the officers before entering the premises. So you are entitled, the rights and obligations say that you can always ask for their identity before they enter the premises. Then you may also seek the authorization. The authorization is essentially in form INS 01, which is prescribed under the rules. The format is clear from the rules, etc. You can find it in GST law itself. Then there must be 2 independent witnesses accompanying officer as well. Then officer must prepare a panchnama while after conducting the investigation and before leaving the premises, where panchnama essentially is a document which says that at what time they entered the premises, what all they investigated, what all documents they sought for, what are the search and seizure that they have taken up during the entire process. If anything is seized, the officer must issue a seizure order. And I must highlight here that seizure can only happen in a situation where you are secreting a particular document or particular record which are essential for the investigation or to determine whether there has been any tax evasion or where there has been any non-compliance under law. So you must not secret any kind of documents or things. You must always be cordial to the officer and supply as many documents as he requires during an investigation. Taxpayers has all rights to take photocopy of seized documents. So once what happens when there is a seizure? So seizure once happens, you have a right to get these goods released on a provisional basis. This provisional basis, the release of goods can happen on a provisional basis. Further, default release happens if SCN is not issued within a period of 6 months from seizure, which can further be extended to a period of 6 months by giving certain reasons which are essential. Say, for example, the investigation requires some more time and they have ample evidences that there has been a tax evasion from the taxpayers premises which have been noticed. Secondly, under section 67, seizure of documents and goods can happen, but there cannot be any arrest. So joint commissioner who authorizes under section 67 to investigate any premises cannot authorize for an arrest. For that, there is a separate provision altogether. Only a commissioner can do that, which we'll be dealing with in the subsequent part of presentation today. Thirdly, that no statement can as such be recorded under section 67. It can only be recorded when there has been a summon issued to you. The summon is issued under section 70, which we are again dealing with in the subsequent part of the slides today. With this, we move on. There are certain principles that have been laid down by various courts as regards section 67 and inspection, search and seizure, because these kind of provisions have always existed under customs law. So these are the principles that have been highlighted. Power to authorize inspection, search, seizure is provided to a rank of officer JC and above. So only JC and above can authorize. Anybody who is below the rank of JC and authorized it is doing it illegally. So you can always challenge those things. JC needs to issue authorization in writing with reasons to believe. He must have a reason to believe. What is a reason to believe? Is that there must be a sufficient cause to believe that belief must be of honest and reasonable person and based on materials and circumstances that there has been some kind of tax evasion in the entire business on which the investigation has been conducted. Then we move on to say that taxpayer has right to receive all documents that have been taken into custody. The officer can always deny basis cogent reasonings. And as we saw that in section 67, the seizure can be of document, goods or anything. What would thing mean has been interpreted in one of those judgments which say that money equally can qualify as things as well. So money can also be seized if it is not accounted for in your books. Moving on, if transaction is not recorded in books of accounts, there has to be a deduction that intention to evade tax is there. Expression in any place which is used in section 67 covers disclosed as well as undisclosed places of business. So say there is a place of business which is not added to your registration at all, which is an additional place of business, then even the investigation can be conducted at those places. The JC just has to authorize that that place has to be investigated as such. In case of any residence, the officers have power to break open any almirah, cupboards, and devices. There is power to even completely seal your premises. But these are generally have been held by the courts to be illegal. So as we move forward, these are the guidelines that one needs to follow, and this happens to be the most important aspect, and this is why this webinar has been organized as such. So these are the guidelines that have been collated out of various instructions that have been issued by various departments, GST authorities, DGGI, who have issued these guidelines saying that the field formation must follow that. So they must identify once they enter the premises of a taxpayer by showing their identity card. Then they must have a valid authorization as such in INS 01 form by some officer not below rank of JC. They must obtain signatures on those authorizations. DIN is mandatory on those authorizations. So even if the DIN is not there, then also this is one mistake that can always be corrected. So this may not be fatal to the entire proceedings, but yes, you must check the DIN whether it is present on the document at all or not. And then authorized premises alone can be searched. So when I said that additional places of businesses which are not even forming part of the registration can also be searched, but the only requirement there would be that the JC authorizes that this place which is not forming part of the additional place of businesses have to be searched in this entire proceedings. In search of a residence, lady officer is necessary. Panchnama is to be recorded, I discussed earlier. Each page must be signed. It must carry date and time. So these are the guidelines for department which they should ideally follow in all kinds of investigations. Then what are the guidelines for us during any kind of investigation that occurs at our premises? We must check the authorization and ask for reason to believe. Yes, the authorization would contain the reason to believe, but we can always ask for it even if they are not providing for it. But yes, to this extent, the courts have taken note of this proposition that whether reason to believe can be provided to a taxpayer at all or not. The courts have more often than not gone on to hold that reason to believe is something which can always be concealed, or it cannot be provided to a taxpayer, because there are a lot of informations or intelligence that are gathered from the market, and essentially those informations which are received have to be confidential. So courts have gone on to it. But yes, when you challenge that there was no reason to believe and there have been roving inquiry without any direction, then the officer or the GST department has to submit it before the court whenever court asks for it. We must cooperate as far as possible and supply all documents which are sought by proper officer. As we said that earlier, all those documents and records have to be maintained prior to any investigation. So it is always advisable that you have all the documents right at the fore, and you should supply it as and when asked for it. We must also submit verified data and seek time wherever necessary. It is not required that you supply all these data right at the front without any verification. You should try to seek time and supply as much document and take your time to verify those data so that there is no discrepancy or there is no confusion as such. You must take copies of seized documents, Panchnama and Seizure memo, and obtain receiving on each document that we are submitting. We must never contest on legal aspects. So mind it, we must never contest it. We should only provide factual details and nothing more. It is for them to decide or come to a conclusion whether there has been any discrepancy or non-compliance on the part of the taxpayers. We must never deposit any amount under insistent pressure of proper officer, and there has been ample jurisprudence in recent past which have gone on to hold that the only method to collect money or collect tax is by issuance of a show cause notice under section 73 and 74. Before that, there can be never be a question or of recovering any money during the investigation. And while there will be an insistent or pressure from the proper officer or the investigating authorities, but we must avoid all these things. We must not pay it because legally it is not permissible. Say, for example, if you have already deposited something upon insistence, then we must register protest immediately after they leave our premises, and we write specifically on the letter or however we want to register our protest that we have paid this amount under coercion or under protest, and we reserve our right to contest that in future. So these are the, again, the other question by which appears relevant here is various times we see that the officers or the GST authorities ask to switch off your cameras, while we are left not much with options but to switch off these things. But yes, there may be a situation which may arise, a similar situation may arise in this regard. So I was saying that various cases we have seen in past and recent past, one of which includes bundle technology, which is Swiggy. There an investigation was conducted by DGGI, and upon their insistence, the money was also paid, or the tax was also paid. Even they go on to the extent that you should pay and appropriate it towards DRC-03, which is a self-ascertained tax, or a self-ascertained or intimation of a self-ascertained tax. So in this case also the money was collected. They were forced to pay it through DRC-03. But even then, the courts have gone on to say that collection of amount during investigation, it can never be voluntary. The facts and scenarios have to be recorded. Those facts and scenarios should indicate that it was never voluntary. As I said, there can be no question of recovering during the investigation. They can always recover after issuance of a show cause notice and following due process of law. Rights of the person summoned should always be there. The court has gone on to hold that any person who is being summoned has his rights and obligations, and those the direction or the guidelines that we just discussed have to be followed in all cases. Recovery, as I said, that can happen only in cases in terms of section 73 and 74 after issuance of a show cause notice. Audit under section 65, search under section 66, 67 can continue parallelly because these both are independent provisions. Audit is a regular process. Search can always be happening at regular intervals. Allegations of harassment and high-handedness have always been to be substantiated. So you must record everything. You must keep all the documents. Every important small details are important for these kind of cases where you face an investigation. So with this, we move on to our next topic, that is summons and arrest. And then we'll be covering the way forward that is required to be followed by any taxpayers. So with this, I also hand over the dais to DK, who will be taking this forward.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Sourabh. Very insightful information. I'm sure by now, you know, the initial 52% of the respondents who answered that they are well prepared, after looking at your the documentation and the reconciliations that you mentioned, probably they would want to change that they are still not so well prepared. And of course, in terms of rights and obligations, they have clearly agreed that yes, those are not known. So we come to, you know, every time there is an investigation, every time there is a search or some inquiry is going on, summons is the most common thing that you will notice, where department calls a person, summons a person to record his statement or to produce any document or thing. So the provision, the way summons has been stipulated is that a proper officer who should not be below the rank of superintendent, it's a gazetted officer, can issue a summon, and this summon can be issued to give evidence or to produce any document or a thing. And the proceedings during summons, when a person appears, these are judicial proceedings. Now, what do these mean? That this is section 193 and 228 of IPC. The person can be punished if he gives fabricated information or false information, or if he interferes or interrupts in the proceedings. So he can be punishable. Also, there are consequences for non-appearance or non-compliance. So if one deliberately evades service of someone, or does not appear in compliance of someone, or does not produce any document, etc., then he is punishable under sections 172, 174, 175 of IPC. The punishment is up to 1 month and a fine. Whereas section 193 and 228 can have punishment up to 3 to 7 years. So these are very dangerous. Also, the GST law itself prescribes a penalty of 25,000 under section 122(3)(d), where for non-compliance or non-appearance in compliance of a summons. Then there are certain guidelines that have been issued for issuance of summons. These have been issued by CBIC as FAQs dated 31st of March 2017, which are applicable even for GST. So in these, they have clearly said that summons should be used as a last resort and should not be used for top management. So typically, if an officer requires any document or something, he should simply write a letter, ask for the information, and failing which, if the taxpayer does not pay, then definitely a summon may be issued. Also, straight away top management should not be summoned. Likewise, whatever summon is to be issued, the superintendent must seek approval, written approval of the officer not below the rank of assistant commissioner. So this is an internal checks and balances that have been prescribed. Also, after the closure of summon, that means a person has appeared and there is a summons proceeding statement has been recorded. The superintendent has to record a brief of the proceedings, what happened in compliance of the summon. And also that the summon can be issued only when some inquiry is initiated or an inquiry is pending, whether in the case of taxpayer himself or in some third party. But some inquiry must be pending. It cannot be without there being any pending inquiry, the summons are issued. Now, next, we about the tendering of a statement. So there are some to-dos for the taxpayers that we will discuss here, because statements have evidentiary value. They are judicial proceedings. So what to-dos are there? First and foremost, the person who is tendering a statement should delve upon the facts and answer precisely. What does this mean? That, whatever the statement should be given on facts, not on the interpretation of law. As Sourabh mentioned, that if there is a question posed regarding law, one can always answer that, this is a matter of interpretation, and that our company believes that this is the interpretation, and we have adopted that in a bona fide understanding, our understanding, and that is all. Never argue with the officer on law. Let him issue show cause notice, whatever, and then it can be fought, because that's a matter of interpretation. But so far as facts are concerned, producing documents or answering facts, as Sourabh also mentioned, provide all the documents that are asked for, delve upon the facts. If you are not aware about any particular fact, then you can always seek time. Tell the officer that, you require little time. Always prepare before going to the officer. Whatever statement you want to give, you can consult a practitioner, GST practitioner or a consultant. Prepare yourself, go through your documents properly. What is the subject matter, what all documents will be required, go through that, and then you should appear. Also, it is important that you should not divulge any additional unnecessary information which is not sought. That does not mean that when any question is put and you are which goes in your defense, and you are explaining something, you will not explain it properly. You have to explain it, but don't divulge any unnecessary or unwanted information. Secondly, during the statement, multiple undertakings are recorded, that you will submit something within 1 week, 3 days, whatever. Make a note of all such undertakings that you give, so that you remember, because copy of a statement is not supplied to you at that time. It is supplied to you only later when you receive a show cause notice. Last but not the least, what happens is that multiple times the statement, when you are it is getting recorded, before signing it, you must reread it. So it is typically these days on a computer, a printout is handed over to you to sign. You read it carefully, see that whatever you have stated is recorded correctly, including in the question, because sometimes the framing of question is such an answer is something else, and it throws a light as if the answer is complete, or there is a kind of an admission. And wherever you want to make a changes, tell the officer to do that, so that you sign only the relevant correct statement. Also, soon after the statement, is irrespective of how tired you are, because that is fresh in your mind, write down whatever was asked and whatever answers you replied, because you do not have a copy. If tomorrow something is asked, then you do not have anything else, and with the time the memory will fade. So it's better to record it then and there. Now, an important or a pertinent question that comes is whether a consultant or advocate is allowed. Can a consultant accompany a person who has been summoned? So the answer is yes. A person, you can always take your consultant or advocate, but the consultant or advocate is not allowed to sit right next to the person who is summoned, and he cannot interfere or do anything. So what the courts have held in this regard, including Supreme Court and various high courts, etc., is that the consultant or advocate should be within the visible but not audible distance. So this word visible but not audible, that means he's sitting at some distance, just to give comfort to the person whose statement is being recorded, that there is no coercion, there is nothing, and but having said that, he is not even interfering. So that comfort is there. Next, we discuss the relevancy of statements. So section 136 of GST law discusses relevancy, that the statements can be used for proving in any prosecution of an offense. So your offense can be proved during prosecution based on the statements. Secondly, the court can admit the statement as evidence. Third is that it is used as a corroborative evidence. So what this means is that essentially there has to be a primary evidence or the main evidence, and then the statement can corroborate. Or if there is a contrary view coming, a hostile witness is coming, then also he can be confronted using these statements. Then also important thing is that several times what we have noticed is that at the time of recording a statement, there is undue pressure or duress or whatever stress that is built upon. There is a threat of arrest or whatever, and person is made to write several things which is not voluntary. So if something is untrue or involuntary, then one should immediately retract the statement at the earliest possible opportunity. So earliest opportunity, why? Because otherwise courts hold it to be afterthought. So this is the reason why retraction should be there. And retraction should not be just blanket that, please treat my statement under coercion. No, you have to give circumstance, under what circumstances you were forced, what fact was exactly which was wrongly recorded, and why. So all those details should be there. Otherwise, blanket writing that the statement is under duress or under pressure will not hold good. Then we come to arrest. So now in case there is an offense, then the courts can also, the commissioner can also order for arrest. So section 69 deals with arrest, power of arrest. Now only commissioner has been empowered to pass an order for arrest, and that too only for 4 offenses is specified under section 132(1). What are those 4 offenses? Now section 132(1) specifies 12 offenses. Out of those 12, only in case of 4 offenses, arrest has been permitted. That too, the order has to be passed by commissioner. Of course, any officer can arrest you once commissioner passes an order. These 4 offenses are where supplies have been made without issuance of invoice. So there is no invoice, it is only the supply, or only the invoice is issued without underlying supply, or ITC is availed based on bogus invoices, or tax has been collected but not paid to the government for 3 months. So in these 4 situations, arrest can be possible or can be made. Now also important to understand is that, in what cases this section 69 also has provisions that after arrest, if the amount is greater than 5 crore, tax amount involved is more than 5 crore, then there is an imprisonment prescribed up to 5 years or with fine. This is treated as a non-bailable offense. That means the person who has been arrested in such cases need to be produced before the magistrate within 24 hours. In all other cases, that is where the amount of tax involved is more than 2 crore, but less than up to 5 crore. In such cases, the punishment prescribed is up to 3 years and fine. And these cases have been held to be non-cognizable and bailable. That means the concerned AC or DC, assistant commissioner or deputy commissioner, can themselves grant you bail in the GST department itself. So they will take whatever surety, bond, etc., and then they can grant you bail. So this is the provision as regards bail. Now coming to, there was a famous Supreme Court case of DK Basu, where Supreme Court laid down certain guidelines for persons who are arrested. that officer must show accurate and clear visible identification with name and designation, that okay, who is arresting, etc. He must prepare an arrest memo where that arrest memo must be signed by a close relative or a respectable person of the locality. Now, why this is important? So that the arrestee's family or somebody must be aware, and he must record at what time and date he has arrested, so that 24 hours start from there. Otherwise, one would not know how many days he is under custody. Then arrested person shall have right to inform his close relative, which is also because signatures are obtained, so close relative would be aware. Secondly, the arrestee will be medically examined every 48 hours during detention. This is also important so that there is no ill treatment. Also, the arrestee can consult his lawyer. This is also very important to protect his rights, and that copies of relevant documents, etc., should be made part of the arrest memo when produced before the magistrate. So these are the guidelines or the safeguards that Supreme Court laid down to protect the interests of an arrested person. Now, there are certain to-dos that we will discuss as to way forward, that, whenever there is one is Saurabh already discussed about the preparedness in terms of documentation, records, reconciliations. So what is the way forward? How should you be prepared? First and foremost, you must analyze your tax positions. And believe me, in GST law, a lot of changes keep happening in the past 5 years that we have been seeing. GST is about to complete 5 years. In more than 4.5 years, there have been ample amendments in the law. There are compliance changes that have come. You must analyze tax positions, including your classification, etc., the tax rate that you are using, compliances that you are undertaking, whether your records are up to date or not. So you must evaluate everything. Your compliance level I have already, and whatever internal controls, whether it is in form of audits, etc., that also you need to keep. So internal audits, everything you should do. You should be ready with all documents, whether soft copies, hard copies, etc., and all places of business wherever you should have access to the same information, whatever is required, and all the reconciliations that Saurabh discussed. Also, periodically you must review your tax positions and your update, your to-do list, etc. In case wherever required, whenever you are faced with an investigation, you must ensure that you're consulting a tax consultant, so that there is nothing wrong that goes from your side which is used against you later in the investigation. So what we have seen here is that an investigation starts from your preparation and officers visiting or summoning you, and it culminates at issuance of show cause notice. So this investigation is very important, because if you do not properly deal with it, you will face with a very, very arbitrary demand in the show cause notice, or all sorts of charges that documents are not maintained, or there is a non-compliance of GST provisions, etc., etc. And those demands, if they are arbitrary, then you'll be faced with the pre-deposit issues later. So it's better to be on the right side of the law, be compliant, be prepared for this investigation, so that when the investigation actually happens, you're not in panic mode. You are in control of your business and your requirements. So I think I'm sure this webinar, we kept it brief. We did not go into case laws and the constitutionality, because the idea was to actually prepare you and tell you that how much is required, how you will be prepared for GST investigation. And now that the timelines for issuance of show cause notice will begin, these issues will be more and more, and especially in light of the large scale evasion. So you should better be prepared in advance. And with this, we end our session. We wish you all good health and happy weekend. And thank you very much. Thank you.